As the president of the League of Women Voters of Brookline, welcome everybody to our second Friday, whose main topic is going to be ranked choice voting. But we do have a sort of a supplemental and important component, which is a ballot question that's only available to the town of Brookline that we'll deal with separately or at the end. But right now, our goal is to help people understand ranked choice voting, which is going to be on the ballot on November 3rd. For people who are participating and speakers, we will we'll unmute you so you can have your speaking and you can share your screen. For people who are here in the audience listening, we are going to ask you to stay muted. And if you have a question as time passes, open up the chat and put your question into the chat, and we will try to deal with all the questions. What we're hoping is that each topic will have about 10 minutes, some time for presentation and also some time for questions. And on that point, I think I would like to open us, and one more just piece of useful information. For everybody to know, this will be recorded, and we are cooperating with our local public access television, the Brookline Interactive Group, who will have the program available for screening. It'll be online. I'm not quite sure. Probably they have their own online channel, and then YouTube is the other place that it's most likely to turn up. So it will be recorded. Okay, starting with our overview, I hope, we will have our former Brookline Select woman, Jessie Mermell, a member of the Brookline Select Board, and also a participant in the most recent, as a candidate for U.S. Representative in the 4th District, where the circumstances make that experience particularly interesting for someone who is now participating in the group who are supporting this ballot question. And I should be clear that although the League of Women Voters is nonpartisan, the State League has taken a position with the support across the state in favor of the ranked choice voting ballot question. So in this particular moment, we are not entirely neutral. Okay, so moving forward, Jessie, if you are unmuted, or can you unmute yourself? Do you want, I think I asked you to unmute and you have to do it yourself.
There we go. Multitasking for Betsy with the unmuting and getting my screen share to actually go in present mode here. But good to see everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Hang on, I don't know why this is not cooperating and going in present mode. Technology is not my friend. We even tested this, guys, before we started at 9:30.
This is not an unusual experience, Jessie.
I know.
We're all learning as we go.
All right. Well, we're going to make do as we go. Well, thank you, everybody, for having me. It's great to see everyone. And I'm excited for the chance to give you a brief overview of question 2. And I know you're going to hear more specifically about how it's worked in Cambridge since 1941 and the specific Brookline question. So I'm going to try and move along here. No, it is not moving in any way. Ridiculous. I was hoping I could get it to move even in this less than perfect. Oh, hang on. These Zoom gods may be smiling upon me. Well, what we're going to review today is a little bit about who we are, the coalition behind ranked choice voting, the problem with plurality voting, the system that we have in place right now, why ranked choice voting is the solution, and what the coalition looks like, the folks behind Yes on 2. And then if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about if you want to help what we are looking for. So ranked choice voting, as this loads here, is a nonpartisan, citizen-organized ballot campaign, an effort to bring ranked choice voting to Massachusetts. It's supported by Democrats, Republicans, independents across the political spectrum, and it actually started as a grassroots movement with just a handful of volunteers in December of 2016. And it's supported, as Betsy mentioned, by the State League. It's also supported by former Democratic Governor Deval Patrick, former Republican Governor Bill Weld, former Republican Lieutenant Governor Carrie Healy, Evan Falchuk, who ran for governor as an independent. So it really is supported across the board here. Let's see if we can get this to move along. All right, miracle. Better late than never. So we got nearly 130,000 signatures. It's the largest signature campaign that's ever existed in Massachusetts. It was the first citizen-initiated electronic signature drive in history, and it's approved and will be on the ballot as question 2 this November. And so it supports the use of ranked choice voting in primary and general elections for state and federal offices, not municipal offices. That's why you have something separate that you'll hear about later for Brookline, beginning in 2022. Again, doesn't include presidential or municipal elections. So here's a little bit about how it works. If you can rank your favorite ice cream flavors or colors or sports teams or Halloween candy for later this month, then you already know how to use this system. So instead of making a binary choice, voters are given the opportunity to rank candidates in order of their true individual preference. And we'll get into some examples of this in a second. So after the first round, if one candidate gets the majority, 50% plus 1, congratulations, they win, the election is over. But if nobody achieves a majority in the first round, an instant runoff ensues. So the last place candidate from the first round is eliminated. And the voters who ranked that eliminated candidate first now have their second choice votes counted toward the appropriate candidate in the runoff. And that process repeats until we have a candidate who's received 50% of the vote. So Betsy mentioned the 4th Congressional District is, of course, now the poster child. It's not about figuring out whether or not ranked choice voting would have resulted in a different outcome. It doesn't matter, and there's no way to know. It's about making sure that we have outcomes that are supported by the majority of people being represented. And as you can see here, that doesn't hold true for 78% of people who voted for someone else. We don't know whether or not there would have been a different winner because it would have impacted how a lot of us campaigned. And I think you'll hear about the example in Cambridge. I have done 2 city council races in Cambridge under their ranked choice voting system, and it creates a very, very different atmosphere amongst the candidates. But the 4th Congressional District is just one of many examples. Since 1998, over 40% of winners have won with less than a majority of the voters. And if you look at this closely, you'll see that 60% of governor's races, both primaries and generals, 44% of all competitive state rep races are won with a candidate not receiving the majority of votes. So the 4th Congressional District is what's top of mind for everybody, but it is by no means the only example. And in fact, I'm sure everyone's aware of the 3rd Congressional District just one cycle ago where something very, very similar happened. And in fact, that winner there won by about 145 votes total. So here's what the problem is. The current plurality voting system fails to guarantee majority winners. It creates spoilers that can alter the election outcome. It discourages candidates from running because of point number 2. People don't want to be seen as being a spoiler. It limits our choices in the voting booth. It rewards negative campaigning, and it can yield voter apathy. So what's ranked choice voting? Well, I talked about it a little bit, but instead of just voting for one candidate, you can rank as many of the candidates as you wish, and in order to win, someone has to receive 50% of the ballots. So let's look at a little bit of an example. So this is how we vote today. These are some theoretical candidates for governor, but I will tell you that the numbers we're about to see are actually rooted in a real example from a municipal race in Minnesota. So here you see that we have a candidate who received, oh, we didn't get to that slide yet. I'm ahead of myself. So here are examples, and this is how we vote today, right? You vote for one, and that's it. With ranked choice voting, this is what your ballot would look like. Not that different, except you rank in order of preference. Your first, second, third, fourth choice, more if there are more candidates. You don't have to vote for 4. Let's say there's a 4th candidate here that you can't stomach at all and you would never fill in a circle for them. You don't have to. You can only vote for 3 if you want, or 1. You don't have to vote for all 4. So what you'll see here is a sample ballot for what happens if, even with ranked choice voting, one candidate, in this case Barbara, were to receive a majority of the vote. We're going to declare Barbara the winner, the election is over, and move on. But what happens if that isn't the case? So let's say in round 1, Barbara has only gotten 34%. Oh, wait, I skipped ahead, one too many. Here we go. So let's say in round 1, Barbara only got 34% of the vote. She doesn't have enough votes to be declared the winner, and nobody does in this situation. So we need to look at who came in last. In this case, it's our friend Charlie with 11% of the vote, and Charlie is eliminated. So if we do that, we eliminate Charlie. He's been taken out of this. He didn't demonstrate enough first choice support. He can't win the election. And those votes for Charlie are now transferred. Their second choice is now transferred to the other candidates. Charlie's voters were able to vote for their first choice candidate, and their vote wasn't wasted because their second choice is now being expressed. So we're at round 2. You can see nobody is at 50% yet. And so it means we need to keep going. So we eliminate the person at the bottom. That's David, who again, didn't receive enough first or second choice votes to be able to win. So we're applying David's down ballot votes to the folks who are remaining, Abby and Barbara. And you can see Abby is now over 50%. She has built the coalition necessary to win. So the brown votes in Abby's bar there, they are folks who ranked Abby as their first choice. The other colors are people who ranked her second or third. And in the final round, when you see it came down to Abby and Barbara, everyone had a say, and this was the outcome. I'll note that in this real world example, Abby and David are stand-ins for 2 candidates who were from the same party and had very similar positions. So it makes sense that a lot of folks who were supporting David were also supportive of Abby, and when he was eliminated, many of his votes transferred to Abby, and she was able to win. So here are some of the benefits of ranked choice voting. You don't have to worry about voting for a spoiler, and I heard this all the time on the campaign trail. I'm sure those of you who are going through the process of deciding who to vote for maybe even experienced this. You know, our field started with 11, ended with 8 candidates. The number of times I heard voters tell me that they were worried about playing political pundit, right? Figuring out who had the best chance of winning, who could block someone they wanted to block, as opposed to just thinking, who's the candidate who best reflects my values, who will best get us for the future I want for me, for my community, for my family. It always allows voters to express their true preference. As I mentioned, you can rank as many or as few as you want. You don't have to rank for all of the posts, and it gives you more choice and a stronger voice in our elections. Winners have a majority of support. There are no concerns, oh, it's moving on its own now, about vote splitting. Fresh voices have a chance to compete. There's some really, really interesting data coming out of places like California and Minneapolis, where they have these systems in place where you see with ranked choice voting, when you have BIPOC candidates and women candidates, they're more likely to win. Those voices break through because they aren't discouraged from running for fear of being spoilers or splitting the vote. So this is a way to increase diversity in our elections. And again, incentives to find more common ground and less negative campaigning. We've got a broad range of honorary co-chairs here. I mentioned some of them. Folks who have run, folks who are fighting for equity in our system. As you can see, more and more endorsers here. It is a long, long list, and we're very pleased to have the league as a supporter at the state level. And if you're interested in getting involved, you can endorse the campaign, you can take a lawn sign, call voters. I put the link to the website in the chat. We'd also love to have you as a volunteer. Anything you can do to help us win would be fantastic. And Betsy, I don't know if you're taking questions now or at the end, but I'm happy to try to answer anything that might be on folks' minds.
Well, I do have one question in the chat, which I think would be appropriate right now. And that is, can you fill in more than one space for a candidate? That is, could the same candidate be given your first, second, third, and fourth vote?
No, you need to, one candidate gets one vote. So whether that's your first vote or your fifth vote is up to you, but you can't rank someone for all of the spots. Now,
Okay.
you could bullet vote them. You could say, I'm only voting for Betsy, and they're just getting my sole number one vote, but you can't give them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, so you can bullet, which is to say cast a vote for one out of all of the candidates.
Correct.
And you could not add, you could not vote for any but other candidate but the one of your choice. But if you choose to, then you must rank them according to the status that you give them. And properly, as I understand it, if there are 10 candidates, you might only rank half of them. You don't have to rank all 10, right?
That's right. If they're candidates you can't stand, if they're candidates you haven't learned about, you don't have to do all 10 in your example, Betsy. You could do the 5 that you like or know enough about. Whatever works for you is just fine.
Okay, so let's hear now from Robin Chen, who lives in Cambridge. She's a member of the Cambridge-Boston League of Women Voters and has been actually using ranked choice voting, which has been in effect in Cambridge since 1941. So Robin, if we can unmute you, I think you have to unmute yourself, it says here. You have the floor. Hi, Robin.
Hello, hi.
It's all about Cambridge and ranked choice voting.
That's right. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see when this starts working. Well, thank you all for having me this morning. I really appreciate the chance to talk about my experience in Cambridge. And I noticed that when you sent around the email talking about this meeting this morning, you gave the example of the candidate for school committee from November 2019. This was a really great example of ranked choice voting in use because we had the atypical occurrence of a candidate who was elected then withdrawing between the election time and the time of swearing in. And because ranked choice voting captures voter preference so effectively, that candidate's number one ballots were redistributed and that vacancy was filled without any need for an additional election. So I'll just, and I have not lived in Cambridge my whole life. There is our election commission sends around an explanation of how ranked choice voting works. Voters can read that, but you'll see that on the ballot itself, it says only one vote per candidate, only one vote per column. And we had a rather large number of people running in the 2019 municipal election, both for city council and for school committee. So you had forums that had many voices, but they were all positive. They really were. And when you saw yard signs, many of them said, vote candidate number one. Now, at first, when you see that and you haven't done this before, you're thinking, well, why is everybody so egotistical? Why is everybody saying number one, like I'm number one? But actually what they mean is, if you vote them as your number one preference, then they are most likely to get elected. Now, they can still be your third or fourth or fifth choice, and they would like to be your second choice, if not your first choice. But once the first choice ballots have been allocated, that either gets a person into office, or if a person doesn't have enough ballots, means that they would need to be elected in a subsequent, what should I say? It's the first round or the second round or the third round. So we have a very attentive poll watcher in Cambridge, Robert Winters, and he keeps the Cambridge Civic Journal. So you can see here that Now, he happens to be a lecturer at a university, so he's very interested in that, as a purely academic exercise type of thing. But you can see that if each of these city council members had become a vacancy, his computer software that matches the municipal software can determine who his supporters or who her supporters would have most preferred to fill that seat. And again, Dexter was the school committee member who withdrew, and her replacement was David Weinstein. So this is what the candidate page looked like. It's kind of a lot of people to learn about, but all these people want to meet as many voters as they can and want to engage them in the process. So it's really quite a luxury that people come looking for you. They really want to shake your hand. They really want to hear what matters to you the most. So I think ranked choice voting really unearths the concerns that people have in the district. And I'll just show you, the example of the candidate website. And again, you don't have to feel burdened to know everything about everybody. If you find somebody who you think would effectively represent you, you can kind of feel comfortable knowing, yes, I do want that person to represent me. And similarly, your ballot will only count for the people who you would want actually representing you. You don't have to rank those candidates who you wouldn't like to see in office. So I guess this is still loading. Yeah, so he says David Weinstein #1. So that's what I mean. So you're kind of scratching your head, why is everybody #1? Well, this is why. And then this is what the, oh, sorry, I want to show you this one first. So in the count, you'll see Monica Bowman got 3,109 ballots, ranking her as their #1 preference. Now that was more than the necessary number to receive office. And so the surplus ballots went to whoever ranked Monica Bowman as their, if a ballot had Monica Bowman as their #1, whichever candidate was ranked #2 on those ballots. So those voters would have gotten their second preference because they already got their first preference in office, you see. And then you can see Emily Dexter got the second number of #1 votes. Now, for our city council vote, the voters vote the at-large candidates, and then among themselves, they choose the mayor. So the popularity amongst the voters can really affect the conversations that are happening behind closed doors as to which person becomes mayor from among the city councilors. And the mayor also serves as the chair of the school committee. So I think knowing how many people truly prefer somebody as their #1 candidate is useful information going forward into the term of office. And again, you can see, so somebody would have been elected in the first round and then elected in the second round, the third round, the fourth round. And it can get out, on the 10th round who got the office. And then the ballots are counted at the precinct level. So there's some sense, although they're, the candidates serve at large, candidates do come from across the city. There are certainly neighborhoods where you see more or fewer of candidate signs. And then you do see after the fact which precinct had which preference for which candidate. So I'll just mostly answer any questions, I guess. I'll say it's not so hard. Like, I have talked to poll workers who say that they have to give voters a subsequent ballot if they accidentally mismarked it in the beginning, but you can use the sleeve that your ballot comes in to help line up the bubbles. And you can see that these bubbles have numbers in them. So once you've ranked somebody #1, you then go down to #2, and if you'd like, 3 and 4. And our Massachusetts Bill of Voter Rights allows us to bring any piece of paper we'd like into the polling place with us. So you can ahead of time have thought, what is the order of preference that you have, and then find the candidates on your ballot in that order. The ballots are not all the same. The candidates' names are randomized. So this ballot begins with Ruth Ryan Allen, but a fractional proportion of the other ballots would begin with Aisha Wilson or Christopher Lim or so forth. So, you can't just like assume that it's going to be alphabetical. They don't want to give any preference to the alphabetization of the candidates. They're randomized on the ballot. So then when you go and hear the provisional ballots being discussed, what was the intention of the voter and how should the voting, how should that ballot be counted? They first begin by saying this was a ballot that begins with such and such candidate, and then they record the preferences of those voters. Now, I did go to hear the preferences of the provisional ballots being discussed, and I'll say there was a voter over age 100 whose ballot was counted. So again, this is not rocket science, this is ranking your preference. Yeah.
So we do have a couple of questions.
Go for it.
One is, let me see. The candidate who got more first place votes, oh, I know, there were a couple of candidates who were from the same party. And the question says, would that encourage several candidates being from one party, possibly foiling first place votes for another party's candidate if there's only one? In other words, if you have multi parties and two candidates from one party and only one candidate from another party, does that seem to impact the way this ranked choice voting works?
So my understanding is that primaries would still happen, and then in the general election you wouldn't have multiple candidates from the same party running.
Okay.
So Jesse, because this is about the example.
Jesse, go ahead. Go ahead.
So, yes, that's absolutely right. If you're talking about a crowded primary, like what I just experienced, everyone's from the same party. And so what you may have is a scenario where people with similar ideological backgrounds are campaigning, not together, but in a more collaborative way. It's not a scenario where people would be, I think someone say, coming together to foil someone else. It's about saying, Betsy and I really agree on housing policy, and, we might do some events together talking about housing, and voters would see that we're very similar. So a voter might give Betsy their number 1 vote and me their number 2 vote because that's a priority issue for them. But it's not the type of thing where you're teaming up and saying, aha, we're going to go get, candidate number 3. And then, yes, after a primary in a general election, while we certainly know in Massachusetts you can have more than 2 candidates, it's become almost regular for us to have an independent candidate. You wouldn't have multiple candidates from one party because it's a general election.
Okay, so a couple of other questions. And I would say in this case, it would probably be useful if both Robin and Jesse are able to answer, if you have a better answer. One, and this is probably a Robin one, because it's a computer calculation at the end in order to establish the total numbers of votes. So are there computer snafus that have there been computer snafus, I guess? And this is the question.
And they have 2 laptops simultaneously running at the same time, so they have a backup plan. I mean, historically, they hand counted in the gymnasium over the course of a week. So I think that was potentially more prone to snafus. I'll double check. I think there was something about 2001, but I think it was something about several people had ranked their ballot had multiple people as their number 1 candidate, and that's an invalid ballot. So I would say with computerization, the computer reader can determine that a ballot is invalid at the time when the voter is voting and spit it back out, like not accept it.
I see.
And the thing I'd add, Betsy, is that Robin's example about Cambridge is very specific because you're electing a large number of people, right? For city council, Robin, 9 city councilors?
That's right, 9.
And a large number of school committee members. So when she's talking about it taking to the 10th round, to figure out who's filling all of those spots. I mean, this is a very Cambridge specific example. What you're going to see in most instances, like a congressional race, like a gubernatorial race, is you're just trying to find that one person who gets over 50% plus one. So figuring out what that win number is much less complicated and much more straightforward.
Right. So what, just for everybody, and I'm going to clarify this for myself, we're talking about the fact that in a race where one candidate will be the winner, it's a simpler process. But if you're looking at multiple candidates, like slots that are available, 10 slots available and 20 candidates, that is the scenario that makes it more complicated to determine who are the highest 10 votes out of the 20 who would become the elected members, as opposed to 10 people running and one person becoming the elected person.
That's right. And for question 2, the statewide ballot question, that only applies to races where you're electing one person. Federal and statewide races other than president would use ranked choice voting. Those are all scenarios where we're just electing one person for one position.
Okay. And then we have a question that could be to either or both of you. What is the status of a surplus votes? I think, Robin, you mentioned surplus votes.
Yeah, sure. So our brochure says that, this is the one from the Election Commission, says any group that numbers more than 1/7 of the voters may elect a member of the school committee. Now, if a candidate is incredibly popular and more than that fractional number is needed to elect that person, then those ballots aren't wasted. Like if they could, I don't know if I can make this clearer because I'm on the inside of it. Maybe somebody would help me.
But what you're trying to say is they allocate those votes.
Yeah, they allocate them. They count.
Yeah. But again, this is a very specific Cambridge.
Yeah, this is Cambridge's own unique version of ranked choice voting that they've been doing for enough years that I guess people there have learned how to do it.
Now, most people can tune out for this little piece of the answer, but I'll say I'm wonky enough about ranked choice voting that I know that Fair Vote, which is the national level advocacy organization for this issue, does care about other types of democracy reform, like multi-member congressional districts. And I think if we were to change how that sort of thing worked in our state, I would imagine that question number 2 could in some future time apply to a scenario where multiple people were elected for the same office.
Okay, next question. What if you want to support a slate? How do you rank your slate people if they are all your number 1 choice?
Well, so I'll answer that. So there are a number of advocacy groups in Cambridge, for example, folks caring about housing or folks caring about bicycle infrastructure. And those advocacy organizations typically choose a slate of people that they support. And within that slate of people, say you care about that issue, then you can choose maybe based on identity representation. Maybe it matters quite a lot to you that it's a female representing you, or maybe it matters quite a lot to you that it's a younger person, or that it's a person who lives closer to you geographically, or somebody who you know through your church or school or business or something like that. So you can really have a personal connection to who you're electing.
Okay, that ended the questions. And I guess what I would like to do, since the next item is a specific proposal for Brookline, which is a little separate from our general discussion of ranked choice, do Jesse or Robin have anything you want to add before we move on to the local proposal? No?
Well,
Okay.
thank you for running, Jesse. I think it's really great that you activated a broader voting base.
As I like to say, on most days, it was my pleasure.
And as someone who has run with Jesse, I can say we've thought about ranked choice voting for a while, and it's going to be an interesting thing if it gets implemented statewide. My guess is, just listening to this, we still are at the very, very early part of a learning process. The good news is we have some actual operating models where they've figured it out. and presumably we get to encourage, we can use those models, we can use them as educational tools. And frankly, the computerized calculation part of it is probably a huge breakthrough, and from my perspective anyway, having seen how people struggle to count the paper ballots.
I'll just say one last thing also.
Sure.
If you've traveled abroad and you've gone to a different grocery store or something, you might be a little, oh, well, there aren't as many flavors here as I'm accustomed to having. Like, I think we take for granted that we're quite used to choosing from a crowded marketplace, crowded brands, crowded flavors, crowded, your spaghetti can be either the spicy or the sweet or the with tomato or, and I think ranked choice voting feels a little bit like that. It feels like more preference, more power for the voters, more choice.
Okay, on that point, we will move on to a proposal to implement ranked choice voting in Brookline. And we have this is a proposed vote for the Brookline town meeting in November, which after the November 3rd election, where the state ballot question number 2 will be decided. So we have Scott Ananian, Nicole McClelland, and I didn't see Megan. Is she here actually or not? I'm not sure.
No, she's not here this morning.
Okay, so Scott and Nicole, who's speaking on behalf of the Brookline proposal? And I gather it's a multi-step process. Is that you, Scott, or?
I'm gonna start off, and Nicole's gonna close.
Okay, then just for the record, we're talking about a vote of town meeting on I'm going to call it a multi-step process, and I'm going to let Scott explain what that actually means. So here's the proposed, a discussion that will be taking place at Brookline town meeting, resulting in a vote on whether or not to implement a version of ranked choice voting. So Scott,
Great,
you have the floor.
I've got some slides too, so let's see how that works. Everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is warrant article 18 on our upcoming town meeting at the end of November, and I'll come back to this, but briefly, as Betsy said, it sets up a study committee to make 4 specific recommendations: recommended equipment, ballot design recommendations, a recommended time frame, and a budget. I'll come back to this, so don't feel like you've got to read it. But before I did that, I wanted to briefly just go over what equipment we currently use and what equipment we might use in the future for Brookline, what your election would look like. And this is actually relevant to the question 2 discussion as well. If we implement statewide ranked choice voting, these are the same sorts of machines we would be using for that. So this is what we currently use. This is optical scan paper ballots, and that has a number of important security properties. If the computers go haywire, as someone mentioned before, your votes are all recorded on paper, and you simply rerun them through the machine and recount the vote. So no one's vote is lost or endangered by a computer malfunction. All the information is stored there on the paper record. These are AccuVote OS machines. They were purchased in 2001 with a 10-year warranty. The model was stopped being made in 2007. So these are going to be imminently replaced for good reasons. We also use what are called ballot marking devices to improve accessibility. So what we would, although Cambridge actually used these same machines for its ranked choice voting until very recently, it's most likely that Brookline is going to be shortly upgrading machines. And these are the 2 machines which are approved by the Massachusetts Secretary of State and have been used to conduct ranked choice elections. One is called the DS200. It's very similar to what we currently are using in Brookline. It looks very familiar, except it has a slightly larger screen, as you see. So someone mentioned earlier that one of the useful functions, so I'm a election clerk for precinct 10 here in town, and one of the very useful functions the machines do is if you do make a mistake filling out your ballot, you fill in number 1 bubbles, or you fill in too many votes on a select 2, which we already have happen all the time. The machine will kick it back out and ask you to fix your ballot and revote, so your vote isn't lost. Currently, there's that tiny little 2-line LCD display on the machine, and so when that happens, you have to call over the election clerk or warden, and we've got to look up what that code means in a book and figure out how to help you. So these newer machines have a much larger screen, which is nice. They can tell you clearly what's wrong and what you need to fix. So Maine uses these to conduct its ranked choice elections and has for a number of years now. This is the other main option. These are very popular in town. Apparently the local vendor is very friendly, and so lots of town clerks like them. But again, they're optical scan paper ballots. So the same thing happens if for some reason we have a computer malfunction, all it means is we have to feed the ballots back through the machine again. The ballots are on paper and they're preserved that way. And I believe Cambridge uses these currently. Same thing, you feed your piece of paper in, it's got a nice big screen to help you if there are problems with with how you filled out the ballot. We've seen the sample ballot for Cambridge, so I can skip over that. And I'll just mention an often overlooked part of town voting is called the central tabulation process. This happens in town hall after the polls close. Observers are welcome, and I don't know that many people take advantage of that opportunity. I'd like to encourage people to do it because it helps improve trust in our election system. As was mentioned, this is where the meat and potatoes of ranked choice voting happens. If we don't have a majority winner from people's first place ballots, which is what we get right at the precinct, then we've got to start looking at the second choice, and that's done in the central tabulation process at town hall. And there are three main options used. They're all software, and it's a pretty straightforward. This used to take a lot of time when people were hand counting, but all these options are very simple for a computer to do, and they're verifiable as that nice election monitor in Cambridge demonstrates. So now we can return briefly to what the resolution says. So it's a select board study committee. It was going to be a town clerk study committee. The town clerk office is somewhat overwhelmed this year with all the elections. They asked us to have the select board lead it instead. It will include a representative from the town clerk's office. Recommended equipment, I showed you the two main options that we would be switching between. You notice that the key point here is that we're not sacrificing the auditability and reliability of our existing optical scan process. Ballot design recommendations for what a multi-candidate race, because some of our elections in town have multiple winners. A recommended time frame for implementation. If question 2 passes, you'd expect that time frame would align with the state timeline. Same thing for funding. If there's funding available at the state level, we might want to take advantage of that in town. But the study committee will sort of offer its best recommendations for what our timeline and budget should be. This is necessary for any use of ranked choice voting in town elections. So at this point, it's not specifying which races specifically we're going to use it for, because these are all things that we need to do before we could use it for any race anywhere in town. So there's 3 possible implementation paths right now. A home rule petition, which is the most likely path. It's possible Fair Vote is working on state legislation for a local option. It's possible we could do that, but this is somewhat in the weeds. And a charter commission is the sort of Hail Mary version as well. But the most likely path, November 3rd, we're all voting on state level RCV, and the November special town meeting here in Brookline. Arlington, in its November special town meeting, is also having a home rule petition. They're about 6 months ahead of Brookline. They're voting on a home rule petition. Brookline is just voting on a study committee. Brookline, one would hope that we could be ready for a home rule petition in, say, May. The legislature could hear and approve the petitions from Brookline and Arlington, and a number of other towns and cities which are pursuing this local option. And in an ideal case, in May 2022, we would be ready for either our last non-RCV town election or first RCV town election, because the first state RCV election, if question 2 passes, would be September of 2022. And now I'll briefly turn it over to Nicole.
And Nicole, you have to unmute yourself.
I think I just did.
Good. Welcome.
Welcome, thank you. Thanks for that, Scott. I'm Nicole McClelland. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 11 and one of the other lead petitioners on the warrant article, which really is just a resolution to begin the process of envisioning a path to the implementation of ranked choice voting for Brookline municipal elections. Like you heard previously, the state ballot question, though there's plenty of overlap, that has really no bearing on our municipal elections. So what this does is says we want to study this. We want to look into this, see what it would cost, see what sort of voting machines we would need, see what sort of voter education we would need to do, to sort of lay the foundation. The question that has come up frequently in various hearings and working on the Warrant article is, do we need this in Brookline? So, briefly, there's a lot of analysis you can go into, and like you've heard from previous speakers, there's no way to know for sure how people would have voted in a ranked choice election. You can't really retroactively determine that, even through analysis of votes, but it is illuminating to look at about the past 20 years of Brookline elections. We've had 3 contested select board races where there's 1 open seat, and only one of those races had a winner who gained more than 50% of the total vote. We've had 9 contested select board races with 2 open seats, and only 3 times did both winners gain the proportional multi-seat majority. So in that case, they would need to gain 33%. So with both of those, we're seeing that only in about 1/3 of our elections is a proportionate majority selecting the winner, even in Brookline. The reason the petitioners are here and the reason you're seeing this locally is because, similarly to sort of the state trend and other trends we're seeing, in Maine and in other municipalities, people are starting to ask, does our electoral system best represent the broadest will of the voters? We've had plurality elections historically, but it's worth asking if the systems we've always used are ones we've used because that's what was envisioned and what was possible, and now are new things possible. We have software that can do this. It's actually, when you think of your brain trying to calculate ranked choice voting, it seems very complicated. For a computer, for voting software, these are just simple algorithms. So all a voter has to do is rank their choices, and the computer does the rest. And what that yields are outcomes where we know that a majority of voters have chosen the winners and the people who are representing them. So that's why I'll be voting yes on 2. And if this interests you on a local level, it's town meeting that will be voting on the resolution in November. So I would certainly encourage folks to reach out to your town meeting members and ask them to support Warrant Article 18. Thank you.
Okay, we have one question that is specifically related to the Brookline ballot, which is, what percent would be required? I don't understand this question, actually. I assume that if the town meeting, all right, let's try this again. If it were adopted, we don't know what format would be adopted for a local election, so it's not clear to me you can answer this question. But the question says, considered for town meeting elections, for electing town meeting members, what percent would be required to be a winner?
Yep. So the study committee, none of this has been determined and none of this is outlined in the resolution intentionally because this is really just a study. So part of the process is looking at which municipal elections should we consider ranked choice voting for, select board, school committee, town clerk, if that remains an elected position. Town meeting is a maybe, right? That's not determined in this resolution because that is part of what the study committee would look at. In terms of percentages, so for a 1-seat election where 1 seat is open, you need 50%. When 2 seats are open, you need 33.3%. When 3 seats are open, you need 25%. So for town meeting, it would depend on the number of vacancies to determine that percentage. It would certainly not be as high as 50%. But it could be done for a town meeting. And I think I am personally agnostic on that. I don't have an opinion and would be very interested to hear what the study committee determined in looking through the possibilities. I will say town meeting seats seem to be trending towards being more competitive. I'm in a precinct that used to have very little competition. And in this past election, we had 10 people running. So, there may be more of an argument for that than there used to be, but that's something the study committee would look at.
And it's worth noting in Arlington, the home rule petition, they're proposing exempts town meeting races from their RCV system, but they have a separate election modernization committee, which is studying a larger overhaul, which I think also replaces the 1, 2, and 3 year seats which town meeting has, and instead allocates them to the sort of first, second, and third place winners in the election. So, you know, there are interesting issues to discuss with town meeting, and certainly a decision will be, you know, when it gets to the point where we're presenting a home rule petition for a vote, those decisions will be codified in that home rule petition. But that's part of what I think the study committee should look at.
Okay, we have one more question that actually goes back to the state initiative petition. And I guess, Jesse, I'm going to ask if you feel you can take this one on. The question is, can you discuss the criticisms that are made or the opposition in the voter's guide published by the Secretary of the Commonwealth? There is clearly a group who have organized opposition to ranked choice voting. So do you have any thoughts? Can you give us any summary or respond to their criticisms?
I honestly haven't read the voter's guide, so I don't know what it says. I do know that the Koch brothers have been aggressively funding anti-ranked choice voting studies because of the ways in which it increases competitiveness and allows new voices into the process, something that we know the Koch brothers are not in favor of, but I haven't read the guide. So
the theme in the commentary, the couple of paragraphs that are written in the voter's guide, have to do with confusion on the part of the voter, who then may or may not be as well prepared to make a proper qualified vote decision as would have been the case under the system which the voter was accustomed to.
So that puts no faith in voters. Cambridge has been doing this since 1941. We have seen it in use in San Francisco and Oakland and Berkeley, in Minneapolis, St. Paul. New York City is adopting it next year. The state of Maine is now doing it. People can do this. Can you rank your favorite Halloween candy later this month? Yes, that's all you have to do as a voter. It is not a complicated system. And the criticism that it is, I think, is rooted in a desire to move us away from a more competitive system that is encouraging new voices to get in. And I see someone in the chat also asked about constitutionality. This has been upheld by the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court both in 1941 and in 1996. And I know your question was about Massachusetts, but federally it's been upheld in federal court both in 2011 and in 2018. And I'd note that Maura Healey, our Attorney General, whose job it is to determine the constitutionality of things, is supporting question 2.
Okay, I think that addresses that question. And I don't have any more right now. And we are actually at the moment in time when we should be moving on to our final item, which, to be fair, is not a ranked choice voting item, but it is a ballot question that will be on the Brookline ballot, and therefore is important to local voters to understand. And for that, I'm going to ask Mr. Wishinsky. Where are you, Neil? Out there somewhere in the universe.
I'm here.
Okay, good.
And I've just shared my screen.
Good.
And it hasn't gotten a lot of publicity, and I don't think it's very well known, but we do have a Brookline only question on the ballot, question 3, which is asking the voters, do you want to authorize the town to buy the West Campus of Newbury College? And when Newbury College ceased operations, there was an overwhelming vote at town meeting to attempt to purchase the whole college. We couldn't make a contingency-free bid, so our bid was not as favorable to the college, and another buyer bought it, Welltower Inc. And at the last town meeting, there was a proposal to allow Welltower to build a senior housing on one side, on the east side of Fisher Avenue, and they've offered to us the opportunity to purchase the west side, and that's the ballot question you see that you're going to be seeing on the ballot. So what are we being offered to buy? So first of all, what you have on the screen is the actual text of the ballot question. And we are offered now the West Campus, which is immediately adjacent to the really beautiful Fisher Hill Park. And what's on there is an academic building, some parking lots, and a converted mansion, and it's a little over 3 acres. The academic building looks like a school, and it's about 30,000 square feet. It's in move-in shape. We don't have to do very much to it. This is the front. This is the rear. The rear actually was expanded about 20 years ago and was used as the Newbury College Library. And it's actually inside quite nice, quite attractive space. This is the so-called West Hall. This building is in not so good shape, and no municipal use has been identified for it. So this could be a likely site for something like affordable housing. This is what one side of West Hall, and this is another side of West. This is actually the back of West Hall from the academic building. So what's the cost? It's the cost of purchasing the land is about it's 14.8 million. We're asking for authorization to float a bond for 14.9 million. That extra 100,000 is for closing costs and some minor upgrades, such as the fire alarm system in the academic building. And once we do that, it's completely usable. And what will we use it for? Well, immediately, it can be used for some social distancing for the schools or the town. The building department will move in for some some shops, and then some town offices. So in the short run, it's kind of a low impact use on the neighborhood, but it can provide immediate relief for social distancing. The real reason to buy it is the potential long-term uses, which have not been determined yet, but there'll be a long-term land use planning process, which the select board has pledged will be there'll be a lot of participation, and some of the potential uses are affordable housing, recreation, perhaps a piece of it could be used to enlarge the Fisher Hill Park, academic uses, senior center, senior facilities, and I would encourage you for more information. There's a yes for Brookline site. You can get more information there, and you can endorse, get a lawn sign, etc. So that's kind of the overview, the 3-minute elevator speech.
Okay.
I think I went more than 3 minutes.
And I'm looking to see, I don't see any new questions in the chat. Wait, I do. Would the existing academic building be used for public school space? And the question is permanently or not?
It can be. There's been, the permanent use of the site has not been identified, but it is potential, it can be potentially used for school space permanently.
Well, I have a question just simply from my sort of historic perspective, having been involved over the years with the development of the housing and the Fisher Hill Park. Do we know that there are other bidders who would be in a queue interested in this property if the town fails?
If the town fails, Welltower, the current owner, has said that they will be selling the site. So there are two likely possible outcomes if they sell the site. One is to a for-profit developer, which would work within the existing zoning, which is basically large single-family homes. It would be about 4 or 5 house lots, and they'd be fairly large. The other likely outcome would be a nonprofit institutional use, which can ignore the zoning, pretty much using it historically the way it's been, at least for the last 50 years or so. But if a nonprofit institutional use purchases it, it would then be subject to the Dover Amendment, and then they could actually build and ignore our zoning, pretty much. So those are the two possible likely outcomes if the town doesn't buy it.
Okay. Someone's asked in the chat about a website about this transaction and the ballot question, the town ballot question, which is in the chat. So if you want to look in the chat, you'll be able to see where the website is. It's called Yes for Brookline.
.com.
Pardon, and .com, which might very well be able to answer any other questions. So I think on that note, we have actually concluded our agenda for the day. And I just want to remind everybody present that the deadline for responding to the census has not yet been met. There is a bit of a time extension. And one thing that I know as a person who sits on the town's census committee is Brookline's response rate is still not what we would wish it to be. It's below 70%. So if you know anybody who should respond, who hasn't responded, we urge you to remind them. They can go online. There are many different ways to respond to the census. But for the record, it is a significant source of state and federal funding having to do with qualifications based on number of persons living in wherever the money is directed. And having said that, I thank you all for participating and look forward to seeing you at the, I may not see you at the polls on November 3rd, but I hope everybody will vote. I've been assured by our town clerk that we will be getting our mail-in ballots shortly in the next, well, probably next week. That's the goal. So I hope that that will actually occur. And yes, unfortunately, I probably will not see anybody at the polling place because I will be voting by mail. But everybody should be participating, and we urge everyone who has not yet requested a mail-in ballot, if you feel uncomfortable about voting in person, please do so. So thank you all. We appreciate your participation, and we look forward to seeing you again at another Second Friday. Farewell. Stay safe.